Way yet. Might have had a technical foul there just as his first half was expiring.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Clark Update. I'm back with another exciting video just for you. I hope you're all doing great and having an amazing day. Today's video is packed with exciting updates and important information, so make sure you stay with me until the very end. You won't want to miss a single detail. Now, without wasting any more time, let's jump right into today's video. Okay, let's go. After receiving her sixth technical foul and a $1,000 fine, Caitlin Clark had every reason to complain. Instead, she chose a path that left everyone stunned. Indianapolis felt like a different place on Friday night. It was the kind of evening when you stopped chatting, stopped scrolling, and simply watched. Almost no one in the history of basketball had ever done what Caitlin Clark was doing on the court. And by the time the final buzzer sounded, everyone in the basketball world was still trying to process what they had just witnessed. 45 points, 2 blocks, 4 steals, and 10 assists. Only 4 other players in all of professional basketball, men's or women's, had ever recorded a stat line as rare and historically remarkable as this one. Even while playing under a minute restriction, she accomplished it in less than 30 minutes. She had not yet lifted her own coaching staff. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 85% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great! Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the video. Analysts were making comparisons to Michael Jordan. The name Luka Doncic was being mentioned. Social media was left speechless trying to explain what had just happened. For one evening, Caitlin Clark's entire story revolved around basketball, what she accomplished on the floor, what it meant for the record books, and what it suggested about where her career was headed. Then Saturday arrived. 90 seconds was all it took for the conversation to completely change. Clark ran into a hard screen set by Liberty center Jonquel Jones just 90 seconds into Indiana's next game against the New York Liberty. She fell to the floor, looked for the foul call, but it never came. She got up, spoke to the nearest official, and was immediately assessed a technical foul before the game had barely started. She had already been fined $1,000 for her sixth technical of the season. Suddenly, the player who had just joined one of the rarest groups in basketball history was on the verge of an automatic one-game suspension after 2 more technical fouls. The celebration from the previous night was still everywhere. Highlight reels continued circulating across every timeline. Yet before she had even settled into her second game of the weekend, the league fined its most watched athlete. How could a sport go from celebrating history on Friday to punishing the very player who made it less than a day later? That question didn't arrive quietly. It landed hard. The game itself was won by the Fever. Indiana comfortably defeated a Liberty team that had beaten them earlier in the season, 108-88, behind 33 points from Kelsey Mitchell. For a team sitting at 15 wins and 10 losses, battling for position in an increasingly competitive conference, it was, by every measure, an important road victory with playoff implications. However, the win barely made the headlines. The technical foul was what people remembered. The fine was what people remembered. The math was what people remembered. 2 more technicals before a mandatory night off. 6 already recorded. After celebrating one of the greatest individual performances in women's basketball history the night before, fans spent the following evening counting technical fouls like a suspension countdown. For many who had followed the season closely, this wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't simply bad luck or unfortunate timing. It was another chapter in something they believed had been building for months. The story really began in June. To understand why Saturday felt like the latest explosion, you have to go back to the confrontation against the Phoenix Mercury. Clark received a technical foul in a game that many fans and commentators considered questionable at best. It was the kind of physical moment that officials usually let pass without turning it into a major issue. Most players forget calls like that. However, this one didn't disappear. After review, the WNBA upheld the technical instead of rescinding it, as it had done for other players earlier in the season. The concern wasn't that a single technical foul was devastating. It was what the decision suggested about how Clark's situation was being handled compared to everyone else on the court. That single ruling ignited the debate. Fans noticed immediately. Within hours, screenshots of the decision spread across social media. Side-by-side comparisons flooded, yet those players weren't facing the same level of scrutiny or receiving the same disciplinary consequences, despite expressing similar frustration and doing far more in the heat of the moment. The same question continued to follow every technical foul afterward. Why was a call rescinded for one player but allowed for no longer reacting to one questionable whistle? They were responding to a pattern they believed had been every disputed whistle was collected, reviewed, and compared to a pattern that fans were becoming increasingly convinced the league fan frustration or internet noise. Indiana's head coach is Stephanie White. She doesn't run a fan account and she isn't an anonymous social media voice. As a professional coach, she has to manage her team carefully while discussing officiating in a way that doesn't create additional conflict with the league office. Even after an earlier technical foul, she told reporters there needed to be conversations about being more strategic with how those fouls were being called against her own player. Take a close look at that. A head coach, speaking on the record, acknowledged that Clark's relationship with WNBA officiating had become something the organization needed to actively manage, not something they could simply hope would disappear or dismiss as an overreaction from the internet, but something they were strategically preparing for. You can see how serious the issue has become inside the organization when a coaching staff carefully chooses every word while publicly discussing such an obvious pattern. The national media has also been paying attention. Commentators from major sports outlets have described the conversation surrounding Clark's treatment, using terms that have pushed the discussion beyond WNBA circles. One week, she was celebrated as the league's biggest attraction. The next, she appeared to be receiving more discipline than many of her peers. Once that narrative moved beyond WNBA-specific coverage and into mainstream sports media, the league no longer controlled it. The conversation began driving itself. The story reached a point where even casual fans who had never given technical foul procedures a second thought started questioning consistency and fairness. That kind of pressure is far different from an angry tweet. It is the league's reputation being shaped in real time by a conversation it didn't start and can no longer ignore. Look at Clark's position in the league's technical foul rankings, and the picture becomes even more difficult to explain. She is currently tied with Kalia Copper for second place in the league, behind only Angel Reese. Yet these three players have very different styles of play. Reese is a physical interior presence who embraces contact and plays with intensity. Copper is an aggressive two-way guard who relentlessly attacks the basket. Clark, meanwhile, is a perimeter playmaker whose game revolves around passing, shooting, and spacing, rather than the kind of emotional, contact-heavy basketball that typically results in frequent technical fouls. So why, halfway through the season, are three such different players sitting in the same disciplinary category? Explaining that shared total as mere coincidence becomes increasingly difficult. It raises questions, and when those questions go unanswered, fans naturally fill the silence with their own conclusions. Conclusions that rarely favor the league office. Out of that silence, the fan community created something remarkably organized for a movement with no official structure. Every technical foul now produces an immediate wave of real-time commentary and documentation. Fans refresh the box score during games to see whether Clark has been assessed another technical that moves her closer to suspension. Screenshot threads appear with video clips and timestamps for every disputed call. Posts compare Clark's technical foul history with players whose actions appear equally or even more deserving of discipline. This isn't random frustration. This fan base has effectively become its own fact-checking department. They are organized, persistent, and completely unwilling to let any controversial call pass without scrutiny. What does it mean when a league office knows every decision will become part of a permanent public record because so many people are watching? Even without a formal campaign, petition, or spokesperson, that level of consistent documentation creates pressure on its own. Every new incident simply adds another chapter to an ever-growing record. There is also a financial side to this story that deserves far more attention than it usually receives. Before the season began, the WNBA quietly restructured its fine system. Under the new policy, technical fouls 4 through 7 each carry a $1,000 fine, a substantial increase from the $200 starting point used in previous seasons. Although the policy applies equally to everyone, its impact depends on who is accumulating those fouls. For a player like Clark, who has moved closer to the suspension threshold than almost anyone else in the league, the financial consequences have increased quickly. A professional athlete may be able to afford a $1,000 fine, but the amount itself isn't the central issue. The real question is what the structure says about the league's priorities. When the financial penalty for reacting to frustration increases, while the officiating that creates that frustration remains unchanged, the burden shifts entirely onto the player. In effect, it suggests that making inconsistency more expensive to respond to is the solution. Fans who believe the officiating is the underlying problem, rather than Clark's reactions, have taken notice. Clark herself has never framed the issue as a personal complaint. She has been especially careful to redirect the conversation away from individual calls and toward a broader structural issue. Throughout the season, she has repeatedly called for the league to replace its current part time officiating system with full time referees. That distinction matters. She isn't asking for special treatment, nor is she asking the league to overturn calls in her favor. Instead, she argues that improving officiating consistency would benefit every player on the court, making it a staffing and infrastructure issue rather than a personal grievance. That position gives her argument credibility beyond simple frustration. It transforms the discussion from Clark believing she receives too many technical fouls into Clark believing the league's officiating system needs improvement. Those are two very different arguments, and the second is much harder for the league office to dismiss without appearing unwilling to address a problem that could be fixed. So, what happens if another technical foul arrives? Once the emotion is removed, the rules are straightforward. When Clark receives her ninth technical foul of the regular season, the WNBA automatically suspends her for one game. That means a mandatory night on the bench, a hefty $500 fine, and no hearing or appeal that changes the outcome. For most players on most teams during most seasons, that would simply be an inconvenience. For the Fever, right now, it would be far more significant. Sitting at 15 wins and 10 losses, Indiana is battling for playoff position in an increasingly competitive conference. Clark averages nearly 21 points, almost 8 assists, and 4 rebounds per game. She isn't just Indiana's best player, she is the centerpiece of the Fever's entire offensive system. She creates open shots for teammates, forces defenses to adjust, and stretches the floor with shooting range that few players can match. Remove her from the lineup, and the Fever don't simply lose a star player. They are forced to run an entirely different offense with less than 48 hours to prepare, during a stretch of the season when every game carries major playoff implications. Without months of practice built around a new approach, how can any team completely rebuild its offensive identity that quickly? To be honest, it doesn't, not without consequences and certainly not in a simple way. However, a suspension wouldn't only hurt Indiana's win-loss record. This season, Clark has brought something to every game that the league has spent years trying to build: higher television ratings, larger crowds, and a level of nationwide attention that women's basketball has rarely sustained consistently. Every arena she visits sells out. Broadcasters point to her games as reliable ratings drivers. The league itself has acknowledged that her presence has accelerated the sport's growth in ways that no single marketing campaign could have achieved. Suspending a player costs more than just one game. It also costs the league one of its most dependable attractions at a time when casual fans are paying more attention to women's basketball than ever before. Is the WNBA truly prepared for what a suspended Clark would mean in terms of viewership and public interest? That is no longer a hypothetical question. It is a real possibility, sitting only 2 technical fouls away. From this point forward, fans have begun treating every technical foul as its own separate storyline. During Fever games, box scores are refreshed in real time to see whether Clark has picked up another technical that moves her closer to suspension. Every interaction with an official is analyzed with a level of scrutiny rarely seen outside of playoff series. Whenever she speaks to a referee after a whistle, social media pauses, waiting to see whether another technical has been called. That kind of constant attention wears on everyone involved, including Clark herself. She is a competitor who plays with emotion and intensity because that is what elite basketball demands. Very few athletes in any sport have had to manage that competitive fire while knowing a suspension clock is always running in the background. With every whistle carrying so much weight, how many professional athletes are expected to regulate their emotions that carefully? There are very few. Those who do usually share one thing in common: they are the biggest stars with the largest audiences and the greatest visibility. That brings the discussion right back to Clark. None of this suggests she should be excused for legitimate technical fouls. Nobody is making that argument. Instead, it highlights how narrow the margin for error has become at this particular moment. She is playing the best basketball of her career while everyone around her, teammates, coaches, broadcasters, and the league itself, faces higher stakes than ever before. Is it reasonable to expect any athlete, especially the most closely watched player in the sport, to perform with so little room between a forced suspension and the best season of her career? The situation becomes even more complicated when you consider everything Clark has already dealt with this season. Early in the year, her coaching staff placed her on a minutes restriction because of injury concerns, and that limitation has remained part of the conversation ever since. The physical contact she absorbs every night has also been widely discussed and documented, fueling another debate about whether the rules are being applied consistently when defenders guard her. Add to that an escalating fine structure, a suspension threshold only 2 technical fouls away, and a league office that has yet to publicly address the structural officiating concerns she continues to raise. That creates an enormous amount of pressure for one player during what should be one of the most rewarding stretches of her career. A week that began with a spectacular 45-point 10-assist performance quickly turned into a countdown toward another fine and possible suspension. The contrast between those two realities couldn't be greater. That contradiction is exactly what makes this story feel bigger than any single moment. No team wants to divide its focus this way during a playoff race. Yet, for Fever fans, every game now includes watching the technical foul counter as closely as the basketball itself, wondering whether the next whistle will change everything. That has become the underlying tension surrounding Indiana's season. It didn't exist a year ago, and many believe it exists now because those with the authority to provide a clear answer have allowed the issue to continue unresolved. The June technical that was never rescinded, the July 18 fine, Clark's repeated request for full-time referees, the suspension countdown, the fan documentation, and Stephanie White's careful public comments about managing a problem that many believe shouldn't exist are all connected pieces of the same discussion. Ultimately, everything comes back to one central question. Does the WNBA intend to respond to Caitlin Clark, not with another statement, not by quietly adjusting the fine structure in an internal memo, but with a meaningful response to her repeated public argument that officiating inconsistency is a structural issue requiring a structural solution? A response that demonstrates the league has heard her concerns and is taking meaningful action. So far, the response has largely consisted of silence and fines. When silence and fines continue long enough, they begin to feel like policy. Since spring, fans have documented every controversial whistle, and they have shown no signs of stopping. The media attention has expanded beyond WNBA coverage into the broader sports world, and that conversation continues to grow. Clark has also shown no indication that she intends to stop raising the issue publicly. That means pressure is now coming from three directions at once: the player, the media, and the fans. Meanwhile, the league office has yet to present a solution that resolves the issue instead of making it more noticeable. The countdown continues. 2 more technical fouls, and the discussion moves from possibility to reality. 2 more whistles, and the league's most watched player will spend a game on the bench, not as an isolated disciplinary decision, but as the latest chapter in a story that has been building since June. Every remaining Indiana game matters in the playoff race. Every possession matters, and every one of those games has been built around Clark leading an offense that functions best with the ball in her hands. The pressure already exists. Whether another technical arrives next week or later in the season, the question remains the same. The league that has repeatedly credited one player with transforming its commercial success and national visibility now sits only 2 whistles away from suspending that very player during a playoff race. Fans understand exactly what that could mean. They are simply waiting to see whether the league does as well. The fan community has documented the record. The media has documented the record. The media has told the story. Clark has made her position clear. The only remaining question is whether the WNBA is truly listening, or whether it will continue relying on fines while hoping the conversation eventually fades away. If you enjoyed this analysis, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the WNBA owes Clark a meaningful response? Also, don't forget to subscribe because this story is far from over.